Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm reporting on just basically one or actually two studies in a way. We did our initial study we did in a US population of women, and in communication with Jackie we decided to replicate it, a few changes, but one specifically with Canadian women. So this will I'll be reviewing for you. This study is not been peer-reviewed yet. We're submitted to journals. We're having trouble getting published. Most of our studies takes several times to give. There's a lot of opposition to publishing anything that's critical of abortion, as you can imagine. Anyway, so the survey population, we use Cint.com is a marketing research firm. They do surveys for, hundreds, thousands of companies or whatever. And they have access to about over 20 million people around the world that they do surveys electronically. They give some, often they give some kind of little reward, like some credit on a gift card or gameplay or something. So people are motivated to fill out these surveys and have done a bunch of surveys. Now, the survey that we sent out, the people, we chose women between 41 and 45 years of age in Canada. They were not told what the survey topic was at all. We had over 1,200 respondents complete the first two demographic questions, where we screened out 74 who reported gender or age outside our range. And then, so we had 1,105 who completed the survey, of whom 26.7% reported history of abortion. Now that's very important because that's a very, well actually that's probably pretty close to the actual rate, but it's very uncommon for surveys to get that high level of a response rate. Typically in the United States with national surveys where they survey national populations of women, they typically get only 30 to 50% of women, the expected rate of women who've had abortions. Our survey is unique in that in the first US survey we did, we got precisely the same number of women, actually surprisingly to the 0.1%, because we don't just start out saying, did you have an abortion? We have what I call stigma-reducing questions that let women know right up front that we're not just judging. So the first question is, some women feel pressured into abortions by other people, like a male partner, or by circumstances like poverty. Do you believe the problem of women feeling pressured to have an abortion is very rare, uncommon, somewhat common, or very common? So we're not directly asking them anything about their own experience yet. We're just saying, of course, women feel pressure to have abortion. How often do you think that happens? And so this is the results of the whole national population, all 1,100 women. And it shows that only 6% think it's very rare, 15% uncommon, and about 50% sounds somewhat common, and 30% very common. And I don't show it here, but as you can imagine, women who have abortions tend to be higher on that scale. They're more likely to think it's common. The second question is, how many people do you know who felt pressured to have abortions? Almost 50% report knowing somebody who felt pressured to have an abortion. Third question is, even if you did not go through with it, have you ever felt pressure to consider an abortion? Now, of all the women who surveyed, 26% said that they'd experienced the feelings of pressure to have an abortion. Of those who did not have abortion, 16% reported at one point being pressured to have abortion. And of those who did have abortions, 55% reported feeling pressured. Then and only then did we ask, have you ever had an abortion? You see, women have been eased into admitting an abortion because we've already asked, have you ever felt pressured? But anyway, like as I said, this is an extraordinary high rate of women who report having abortion, which closely matches national statistics. In the United States, 22.6% of women are estimated by the Alan Guttmacher Institute of having an abortion in this age range. By the time they're 41 to 45, they estimate 22.6. So slightly higher than in Canada than compared to the US average. We then ask, which best describes your decision to have an abortion? It was wanted and consistent with my values and preferences. That was 40%. In the US, it was 33%. Accepted but inconsistent with my values and preferences, about 38%. Unwanted and contrary to my values and preferences, 15%. And coerced and contrary to my values and preferences, about 7%. So obviously, unwanted and coerced are overlapping, and to a certain degree, accepted and inconsistent with my values is overlapping. And I actually we'll typically talk in terms of 60% of women had abortions contrary to their own values and preferences based on this data here. And that's the one fact I want you to burn in your brain right now. In the US Canadian population, 60% of women are having abortions contrary to their own values and preferences. Now, I generally call those unwanted abortions. Even though I have the 3 different categories, I collapse in unwanted abortions because these are women who mostly would say if they had support from others or more financial support, they would have had the baby. So in one of our studies, I felt pressure from financial concerns. In this graph, you'll see these different colors. Actually, this isn't probably the best one, but you'll see we divided out how they rate it. So we asked on a 100-point scale, on a sliding scale of 100 points, was your, I felt pressure from financial concerns, not at all to very much so. So they could answer anywhere from 0 to 100. And you'll see that the women had, well, let me go to the next slide because I think this is the one I really want. So here's, I felt pressure from my male partner. You'll see the high peak there for the wanted group is down way low, under 25 on that scale because it was freely wanted, and it makes sense, right? You'll see for all the other groups, especially the coerced and unwanted part, that scale is broad, it's across the whole way, but it shows that it's distribution. A lot of women had high scores, a lot low scores, but the point is that there's very distinct differences between these 4 groups: the wanted, inconsistent, unwanted, and coerced. So we also asked in the Canadian study, which we did not ask in the US, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong slide here. The highest degree of pressure, so we asked on 5 scales, we asked again on this 100-point scale, to rate pressure from male partners, from family, from other persons, from financial circumstances, or from other circumstances. And this is another important scale to memorize or report on, that 66% of the women reported at least 80 or more on one of those 5 scales. Some would be 80 or more on maybe all 5 scales. But anyway, at least one, and substantial from 60 to 80%. So we call this high is over 80, substantial is from 60 to 80, moderate 40 to 60, modest from 20 to 40, and little 20, under 20. And only 7% report little pressure. This scale shows the results of a number of these different scales, kind of shows, and again, this is in the report, which you'll be able to see, and Jackie can share with you the link. We have a preprint that's available so you can look at all the stuff in more detail later, so you don't feel the need to write it all down. We also then asked, and this is unique to the Canadian study, the worst of any negative emotions and or mental health issues due to my abortion occurred either immediately, 35%, within 1 year, 15%, were delayed, peaking more than a year later, about 11%, continued to persist even today, 15%, and only 25% said I've never experienced any negative emotions or mental health problems. And that group, which we'll see in a few minutes, closely matches the women who say I freely chose my abortion. Okay, so this is one of the core findings in these studies is that between 33 in the US and 40% in Canada, women would describe their abortion as freely chosen and consistent with my values and preferences. And that's the only group which claims any benefits from their abortions, which isn't too surprising on average, right? So the women who feel coerced or feel they accepted if they had given to it, if it went against their values and preferences, they're more likely to report the whole scale of these negative effects, which I'll be showing you in a minute. Here, again, that same question, the worst of my negative emotions occurred continue to persist today is the top level. And you can see that first little bar to the left, the smallest one, that's the women who were freely chosen and wanted abortion. So only a small portion of those who are saying I'm having the worst problems today were those who freely wanted, whereas the inconsistent, unwanted, and coerced groups, significant percentage of them continue to have their worst problems even today. And you can see that for each of the others. So here's another good example. We asked, the idea of abortion conflicted with my maternal desires. Not at all, to very much so. Again, you'll see that pink bar to the left. The wanted group had, in general, low scores, but even some of them had problems, whereas the yellow and green scales are shifted more to the right, to the higher scores. The idea of abortion conflicted with my moral beliefs. Not at all, to very much so. Very similar pattern. Again, confirming that our scale, and I think this is one of the important points, is this question. How would you describe your abortion decision? In my view, should be asked at abortion clinics before the abortion. Because if she's going into it because it's accepted but contrary to your values, much less it's unwanted and I'm feeling pressured, you know, the abortion clinics should be screening for these things. I know there's no chance of it without legislation requiring it, but I'm just saying, ideally, it's easy to, this evidence is strong evidence why this should take place. I perceive that pregnancy as being a clump of cells or a human life. So 0, a clump of cells, a human life, 100. So, and obviously there's a scale to that. People are answering, well, kind of, whatever. But clearly, again, the freely chosen abortions were more likely to perceive it as just a clump of cells, whereas those who felt pressured and coerced were much more likely to rate it over 50, 75, or even 100. My negative emotions regarding the abortion are none at all to very high. And again, you see a very strong change between the lowest, the wanted abortions versus the coerced abortions, and all the ones in between. Abortion made my mental health very much worse or very much better. And if you can see those vertical dashed lines, those show the mean average for each group. And you can see that the mean average for the women who felt coerced is down there near 40 or below 40. So that indicates very much worse. So in this scale, everything to the left. And the wanted abortions, their mean score was only about 55. The other three groups are all below 50, which means they attribute more mental health harm to their abortions than benefit. This scale kind of shows the same thing, better or worse. So all three groups, the mean score, you can see the dark line is below the midpoint, the average, which was 50, which is rescaled here as a 0. So the outcomes attributed to abortion, we asked again on the same 100-point scales if, I have a hard time with my angle here. Better mental health, only 10% gave high scores for better mental health, whereas another 10% said it was devastatingly bad, score over 80 on. So one of my main points here is that for every woman who claims benefit from mental health from her abortion, there's 2 that claim harm and 3 dead babies. So, you know, the calculus isn't really working out that well. Negative emotions, again, so these dark scales, you know, if you take like that top scale says 39, 18, and 10%, you add all those together, that's the moderate, substantial, and high. So we can say about 70% of women reported moderate to high levels of mental health harm related to their abortion. Negative emotions, similar positive emotions we asked about. Again, negative emotions were more common than positive emotions. and we looked at the financial security. Here we look at unforgiveness and shame at the top, regret, empowerment. That's the least high scores for empowerment, anger, emptiness, relief, guilt, anxiety, depression near the bottom. Nearly 70% reporting moderate to high levels of depression. Similarly, with grief. We asked about complicated grief on this slide. We asked about sexual dysfunction, with about 30% reporting moderate to high levels of sexual dysfunction that they attribute to the abortion. Now, this is very important. We're not asking if they've had this in their lives. They say, did the abortion contribute to these problems? Fear of sex. Child thoughts refers to frequent thoughts about their child. Do they have intrusive thoughts about their aborted child? And over 60% reported moderate to high levels of intrusive thoughts about their aborted child. Risk-taking behavior, suicidal thoughts. There's about 25% of women had suicidal thoughts that they attributed to the abortion. Eating disorders, about 27% reported moderate to high levels of eating disorders. A little higher for alcohol use, drug use, flashbacks to the abortion, uncontrollable weeping, and sleeping problems. We did a study where we looked at Medicaid data and were able to demonstrate that women who had abortions had several times increased risk of sleeping disorders within the first few months and year after their abortion. So to summarize, and this is the most important things that you need to take away, there's a national epidemic in both nations of unwanted abortions. Over 60% of all women who have abortions feel pressured into abortions that violate their own values and preferences. And nearly 10% are literally forced into abortions by someone they perceive who has power over them. Unwanted abortions, obviously, are the opposite of free choice. True reproductive freedom necessarily includes the right to not be pressured into an abortion that violates your own values and preferences, right? We all agree with that, right? But that's not part of the national conversation, is it? When we hear talks about reproductive autonomy and right to choose and everything else, there's this underlying assumption or presumption that abortions only occur when women freely want them and they benefit from them. You've heard the false data from the Turnaway study claiming that 98% of women don't regret their abortions. The real question was, given your situation, was abortion the best decision for you? Didn't ask about regret. The same study actually showed a lot of these women had regret, but the question was, did you make the best decision you could at the time? Given your situation, was the best decision? And most women will continue to affirm, I made the best decision I could at my time. Now, it's not shown here, but another one of our studies, we delve into more detail in that, and we ask a national population. The problem with the Turnaway study is they had nearly 70% of women who refused to participate in the study. They primarily had women who reported, my abortion was wanted and freely chosen, or would have reported that, who participated in their study. So the Turnaway study, where the other side's, you may have heard, but the other side's constantly claiming most women benefit from abortion. That's only when you survey women who it was freely wanted and consistent with the values and preferences. They are consistently missing this group, which is one of the breakthrough things that we're done with the study and with the set of questions. I've been able to get more information about women who had felt coerced or unwanted abortions or abortions that went contrary to the values than anyone has before. So I think this is a point of common ground, something that has become part of our rhetoric, part of every newsletter, every point we make to the public. We need to start drawing people into the question about what can we do for at least to help the women who feel pressured into unwanted abortions. This is something that your honest pro-lifers, most of the people out there, I'm an honest pro-choicers, I should say, quickly gravitate to. Yeah, oh, that's wrong. They support, they don't want to see women pushed into unwanted abortions. Now I make the distinction between the honest ones and the dishonest ones because I make a distinction between pro-choicers and pro-abortionists. Pro-choicers really care about women, and for whatever reason, often they care about the unborn baby too, but they've hardened their heart to the unborn baby because they feel, they buy into the lie that you have to choose between one and the other, and I'm going to side for the woman. It's sad, I don't like that abortions happen, but I think women should be able to do what they think is best for them. So that's the honest pro-choicer. The pro-abortionist is the population control person, the social engineer, the one that says, oh, we don't need any more of these babies running around here, okay? Especially if they're poor, likely be uneducated, more likely to fall in drug and substance abuse, whatever. They see a certain group of people that they're targeting with abortions, and if these people are feeling pressured to have abortions, that's okay. We should take advantage of the natural pressures that occur and get them an abortion because we don't want them having abortions anyway. So my big whole issue has always been that it's well known that certain groups of women have psychological problems after abortions, and you can screen for these risk factors. Even the American Psychological Association identified 15 risk factors. But none of the abortion clinics screen for it because they face no liability. They can't be sued if the woman agrees to it. Unless you pass a law that allows women to sue for psychological injury after abortion, you can't hold them accountable. And as I said, they have both financial and ideological reasons to want to do as many abortions as they can, even if a woman's pressured into an abortion. Now this is contrary to everything else in medicine. Another very common elective surgery is LASIK surgery. Maybe some of you've had it, where they go in and they do things to your eyeball and make you see better, right? But not for everybody. Ophthalmologists, or ophthalmologists, whatever their proper name is, who do that, they screen before they do the surgery. They look at your eyeball, they consider all the different factors, and they turn away about 20 to 30% of people coming in for LASIK surgery. They say, no, you're not a good candidate for it. They're making a decision for you that you're not going to get good results. And that's supposed to be true with all of medicine. They're not, you see a drug advertised on TV, I assume they can do that here in Canada like they do in the US all the time. And they list all the risk factors. The reason they advertise it on TV and say you got to go talk to your doctor is because the doctor's supposed to say, even though, oh, I want that drug, that sounds it's going to make me good. The doctor's supposed to look at you and say, oh, but you got high blood pressure, whatever, no, this would kill you, I'm not going to give this to you. It's the doctor's job to protect you from making a medical decision where you might hurt yourself. Everywhere except in the abortion clinic. Only in the abortion clinic. Do they also argue, oh, we shouldn't even tell you about all the risks because that might just make you nervous. So we don't want to tell you about the studies showing increased risk of suicide after abortion because, well, they haven't proven that it's the sole direct cause of suicide. There could be other factors. So the level of disinformation that they engage in to hide the truth from women is immense. And they are truly complicit in coerced and unwanted abortions, in addition to deception, because that's their job. And it advances both their financial interests and their population control and social engineering interests, etc. So the solution is we must begin to find and identify and quantify how frequent, unwanted, unsafe, and how unnecessary abortions really are. We've got data here that helps to lay a groundwork of what we expect. But my goal in the US and encouraging you in Canada to do is try to push ways for the government to require abortion providers to gather more of this information. So we really know how often our coerced abortion is taking place. Obviously the abortion clinics don't want to know, but that's information that the public needs to know. We need to elevate in the mind of the public this concern for protecting women from unwanted, unsafe abortions. So again, my effort is to encourage adequate pre-abortion screening and counseling. And the policy recommendation I've been pushing in the US is trying to get legislative hearings to start with, have Congress asking experts like myself and people from the other side, what's the extent of unwanted abortions? Just because, when's the last time you heard the discussion of unwanted abortions in the newspaper or on the radio or anything? It's not happening, is it? In my mind, it's the most important issue going on with the issue of abortion. Because again, it's a common ground area. So in the US, they're talking about, trying to get a federal ban after 15 weeks. That would protect that would reduce abortion rates by about 5%. What if we were to stop 60% of abortions which are contrary to women's values and preferences? And it might be a little more cost effective to focus on that. But anyway, the other question is, what is the harm done to women by unwanted abortions? Again, we have clear evidence that if a woman's conscience and feelings, if she's not doing it freely according to her own values, she's more likely to have a whole bunch of problems. Even those who freely choose abortion, I should add, a minority of them will still have a bunch of problems. Okay, so it will admit it. Some may have more problems that they don't even know and recognize yet, but we don't have to prove that every abortion harms every woman, right? We only need to demonstrate that some women are being hurt and there are ways to protect them and avoid those injuries. So that leads to the question, what can we do to reduce unwanted abortions and when are abortions unsafe? So one of the things I've been advocating for, falling on deaf ears, I'll just be honest, is a abortion access, risks, and complications registry. Now, many European countries, certainly in Finland, Norway, and Sweden, all have abortion registries, which means every abortion is reported to the government. And they are able to link that registry to other records like death certificates, which is how they demonstrated high risks of suicide immediately following abortion. So it's not unprecedented for countries to have these kinds of registries. There's registries for cancer, all kinds of things. So there needs to be an abortion registry. And that registry should require the abortion providers to provide demographic information, but also the results of a self-administered questionnaire where the woman would identify, are you feeling pressured? What are your moral feelings about abortion? All these risk factors, have you a prior history of mental illness? All that stuff should become data that's accessible to the government and researchers to identify what are the patterns of unwanted abortions and what are the harms associated with them. Look for the reasons of abortion, follow-up assessment of any complications. The questionnaire should also include, have you had a past abortion? Because multiple abortions are a risk factor for worse effects. So that's a good time to ask at the time of the second or third abortion, how have you been dealing with the previous abortion? Well, I've been drinking like horribly. So the point is that there's ways to gather all kinds of data at the abortion clinics, and the abortion clinics aren't going to do it until they're mandated to do it. What it does not do is does not directly ban or regulate abortions on a national scale. It only requires reporting of the data. It poses no burden on women other than to complete a pre-abortion screening form, which itself is something the doctor should be doing anyway so they can give good counsel to the woman. Again, as I said, they should be screening for these things just like LASIK doctors do. They screen for these risk factors and give a recommendation. In theory, abortion providers should be screening for all these things and giving women a good recommendation, whether or not they think the abortion is going to benefit or harm them. The benefits is it would establish a national standard for pre-abortion screening. So if you mandate this data gathering, you're also effectively mandating you have to screen for these things and consider them in your medical recommendation. And it would then make it easier to hold abortionists accountable for the injuries that they cause to women. Data on negative outcomes from prior abortions will be collected whenever women seek subsequent abortions, as I mentioned earlier. And that would help us gather data about health risks of abortion. As I said, it would also make it easier for lawsuits against the doctors. Now, obviously what I'm recommending is not going to be something that the other side is going, oh, that's a great idea, right? They're going to oppose it. But to me, that's the value of it. Their opposing it drives a wedge between pro-choicers and pro-abortionists. Because pro-abortionists will have to start revealing that they don't want to know about the truth. They don't want to gather statistics. So the people who really care about women, who want to stop coerced and unsafe abortions, would say, oh, why are they pushing back against data gathering? So I think it's very important that we push for this because it's very hard for the other side to even argue why they are opposed to it, right? Oh, we don't want to know why women are feeling pressured. We don't know how many women are feeling pressured. Let's just pretend it doesn't exist. This is why we need to make it a constant call, and in part, in my view, we have, 30, 40 years of talking about the baby. We need to shift all that energy, as much as possible, into 2 or 3 years of talking about the problem of unwanted abortions, so that it becomes the focus of the debate, and the other side can't ignore it. Post-abortive women who have, the various Silent No More, other groups who have tried to raise public awareness about the harm women does abortion, the media runs from them. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to report it. They want to maintain the myth that abortion helps women. And very few women ever complain about it. That myth, as long as they can silence this, but if we can raise the unwanted abortions issue as a constant refrain, one that our politicians report, I've been trying to get politicians to debate it in the U.S., become the Senate. But pro-life groups need to lead politicians into doing this, I think. But if it becomes part of the political rhetoric, if we had legislation before that might be passed that would address unwanted abortions, that forces the media to pay attention. That forces the media to cover the issue of unwanted abortions. It forces the media to interview and report from women like Silent No More, here's the forced abortion I went through. This is, as I mentioned at the top, I don't know if I have the slide in here still, but remember at the top, only 6% of women, 6% of the population that we surveyed thought that unwanted abortions are uncommon. So most people, even on the other side, recognize, yeah, this is probably a problem. But they've never been called to focus on it. They've never been called to, how are we going to solve this? They've never been called by pro-lifers to say, hey, let's agree. And to a certain degree, and I guess that's what this slide is basically represents, I'm asking pro-lifers to make clear that our focus right now today for this discussion is not to stop abortions for women who really freely want it and it's consistent with their values and preferences. If those women want it, that's not who I want to address today. I want to worry about the 60% who don't want abortions. How can we, on both sides of this issue, help those women? Now, in a sense, we're not criticizing, arguing that for a ban on all abortions, or at least we're deferring to that to another day, right? We're saying, what can we do for common ground to stop the unwanted abortions, which everybody of goodwill should agree should be stopped. And even the abortion clinics would say, oh, well, we already screened for that. Well, good. If you're screening for it, let's report it to the government how often you screen, what you find. So whatever they do, we just keep pushing that this is the common ground area. And force the other side to look ridiculous in their opposition to efforts to stop it. Abortion providers do these abortions because they get 3 times the patients through when they do unwanted abortions. And we need to start focusing on that. We need to be not afraid to describe the abortion providers as abortion profiteers who are taking advantage of women who are feeling pressured in unwanted abortions. And really push hard. So here they make 3 times as much simply by refusing to provide the evidence-based screening and counseling necessary to prevent unwanted abortions. Now that's a big thing in medicine right now, evidence-based medicine. That phrase, anybody here involved in medicine knows that. Evidence-based medicine, what is the evidence for procedure that actually produces benefits? There's no benefits to abortion that have been proven, and lots of risks. And the abortion clinics, again, are simply taking the position that they're free, they're just honoring women's free choice instead of doing what's right. We're just pushing the common sense principle that no medical procedure should ever be done that is more likely to hurt than help. Right? That's obvious. And the other side keeps ignoring it. Patients must have a right to sue any physician who does an unnecessary and unsafe medical procedure. This leads into the action point where if we can create liability for the abortion clinics to ensure that they only do abortions when abortion is safe and beneficial, how many abortions do you think they'll be doing? Right? Because even some of the women who had freely wanted abortions have problems afterwards. So the abortion industry persists because they have never faced proper liability for giving proper screening and counseling. It's buyer beware. We're just here to do what you want. And lied to you about it before. They're not going to tell you the full risks. Even if most people believe some access to abortions is a necessary part of modern life, at least we can all agree that doctors should do everything in their power to avoid unwanted or unsafe abortions. Again, that's just another way to summarize a common sense principle, which I'm sure all of your neighbors who aren't pro-lifers like you would say, yeah, that makes sense, right? Now, the World Health Organization's definition of a safe abortion is, abortions are safe when they are carried out with a method that is recommended by WHO and that is appropriate to the pregnancy duration when the person carrying out the abortion has the necessary skills. So I consider that a very limited definition of safe abortion. And the thing we need to be pushing towards, even like WHO, is that a safe abortion is one for which there is clear evidence that the likely benefits are greater than the risks, as measured in light of each individual patient's risk factors. So now it's not automatically assumed to be safe, it has to be judged in the context of each woman's risk factors. And any other abortion is an unsafe abortion. So legal abortions, at least 60%, according to of legal abortions in Canada, are clearly unsafe because they're contrary to the woman's values and preferences, which is clearly linked to negative outcomes. Yeah, here's the slide I was thinking about earlier. This is the Canadian results, just of only women 41 to 45, but it's probably pretty similar for all Canadians of all genders and age groups. But again, we're not trying to convince people of something they don't already believe. See, the pro-life message faces this hardship. People who've hardened their heart, everybody knows that life begins at conception. But people have hardened their hearts to it because they think abortion helps women. So if you keep trying to tell them, hearts beats at 3 weeks and the brain activity, all those biological arguments are true, but when you have a hardened heart, it's not going to make sense. But if your heart is hardened to the baby, but concerned for women, and now we start talking about the concern of women, that women are being hurt by abortion, women are being coerced in unwanted abortions, doctors aren't protecting them from unsafe abortions. Now that heart turns towards the woman and says, well, wait a minute. If abortion doesn't help women, why are we killing babies? It follows after the realization that most people are basically pragmatists. They think if the benefit outweighs the harm, if a woman's helped and a little baby, so small, is hurt, then maybe that is less harm than the good. So they're making a judgment. By shifting the judgment, focusing on how abortion hurts women, we soften people's hearts to the fact that a baby is being killed. That's always been my belief, but the main reason I'm saying it in the context of this is when people harden their hearts, it's harder to shift them. When people are already oriented to believe that unwanted abortions occur, we're going to convince them they occur far more often than they want. We're going to shift everybody up that scale to understand that it's very common, not just somewhat common. They're already oriented to believe that some women have psychological problems after abortion. Again, we've done polling that shows on average, even people who are pro-choice, yeah, it's not an easy thing to deal with. But they don't talk about it. It's not a center point of controversy or public policy. So by moving people to the idea that, yeah, unwanted abortions is a common problem and it's psychologically harmful to women, we're moving in the direction where they're already oriented to believe. We're not trying to say, soften your heart, the baby is important, the baby's life is sacred. They've hardened their hearts to that. Instead, we're saying, you're focused on the woman. Now, again, the one group that won't go along with this, of course, is the population controllers, okay? But we need to expose them because they hide behind pro-woman rhetoric when, in fact, they're quite comfortable with exploiting women. So conclusion, my recommendations is we need in every pro-life comment, statement, poster, something, we need to be constantly talking about the crisis of unwanted abortions. 60% of abortions in Canada are unwanted, contrary to women's values and preferences. Okay? Keep hitting it, and eventually the media will say, where are you getting that from? And again, we've got the data to show them. And the other point is we can also point out to them, this is very easy for you, the press and politicians, to confirm this data. Only takes 4 or 5 questions on your next time you do a poll, and you can verify everything that we're showing you here. This is verifiable information. And the goal of reducing unwanted abortions should be embedded into every public policy proposal. I think that's it. And do we have time? I'll ask questions or whatever you want to do. Any questions? Yes.
Yes, my name is Gerard Bonello, and
might as well.
well, my name is Gerard Bonello. I have a couple of questions. My first question has to do with your survey. I'm just wondering if in the survey did you screen out any other factors besides the abortion that could have caused some of these issues that women are having, such as financial issues, divorce, and so on?
Right.
Okay.
No, in this study we did not do any, for example, like grief or anxiety. We didn't try to find out all the causes of each of those things. But the question was very specific. Do you attribute, how much, if any, do you attribute this symptom to your abortion? So this is all about basically people's own self-attribution, and I understand where you come, for example, substance abuse. I mean, somebody might say, 100% substance abuse, but they could have had other substance abuse contributing factors, but we didn't sort that out. We're only trying to sort out right now how do women perceive what there were. So there's not an objective third-party element of looking at all possible risk factors for each of these things. We asked each woman to just attribute what did abortion contribute to. Yeah.
Sort of piggybacking on that comment, how would you create liability it's very difficult if a woman says, nobody told me I was going to start drinking because I was going to have babies in the night or whatever her issue is. How do you go to court?
How do you create liability is the question. That's a great question. And now we managed to get a law passed in Nebraska, but it's not been enforced. But basically you need to pass, under common law, you cannot sue for psychological injury unless you've actually been hurt. So if a car came close to you and you can't sleep or whatever, you can't sue for PTSD because the car didn't actually hit you. Once you got hit, now you can get sued for all those things. So that's how the abortion industry hides behind, because you agreed to a surgical procedure. And so, but you can pass a law that says that women have a right to redress for psychological injuries attributable that are associated. Now, associated is a key word in research and statistics. That just means it's statistically associated with it. We don't have to prove causation, just associated. It's statistically associated with it. But also, in our model legislation, we require that we create a presumption if the doctor did not screen for all these risk factors. If they don't screen for all the risk factors identified by the APA or identified in the medical literature, then there's a presumption they were negligent. Kind of like, again, going back to the LASIK surgeon. If you did not check for the shape of the eyeball, that's negligence, right? So I think that's the strongest point, is to tie it to certain behaviors of pre-abortion screening and decision-making. Our model legislation also requires that the doctor, after doing the screening, needs to write down, record what their evidence-based recommendation is as to how or why the abortion would be more beneficial than harmful to the woman, or more harmful than beneficial. So we make them document, why are you recommending abortion as being beneficial? Now, if you had a cancer treatment, doctor would be able to do that. LASIK surgery, doctor would be able to do that. Abortions, they never do that. So yeah, you do, in order to create liability, in my view, you have to require screening for the risk factors, an evidence-based medical recommendation, and a right to sue for reckless endangerment and even for the wrongful death of the child if the doctor didn't do all the proper screening. So the screening is, in essence, the behavior of the doctor that determines whether or not, or what level of liability they'd face. Of course, that judgment could also be judged afterwards because other doctors could come and say you shouldn't have done the abortion even though, you know, so their judgment on that screening would still be subject, but we do need special laws to allow suits for psychological injury as the bottom line. Yes?
You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that abortion in Canada anyway is not justified based on its medical benefit. It's justified on the basis that it is a woman's right to choose and have agency over her own body. So just like somebody who smokes cigarettes, it's harmful, but it's your choice.
Right. Well, you know more about Canadian law than I do, and that could very well be the case, but that doesn't mean that the law couldn't be changed to create liability for unwanted, unsafe abortions. Because even though, even in theory, because I'm not sure, you know, I don't know Canadian law, but I know that kind of began, abortion just kind of began because people started doing abortions and the government decided not to enforce laws against it, basically, didn't it? And I'm not sure what... Okay, so, but in any case, the fact, again, the evidence is clear that there's certain groups of women who are being hurt by abortions, and the idea that she is acting autonomously is something that the abortion provider should be checking on. Is it a free choice consistent with their values and preferences? The failure to do that, in my view, is negligence, it's wrongful behavior, it's complicity in a coerced abortion, and, you know, if we're going to enshrine women's right to choose autonomy as the high goal, it cuts both ways. If a woman's not autonomously choosing the abortion and you're complicit in her suffering the after effects, there should be liability for that. Now, as a part of Commonwealth of Britain, in Britain, the law still exists back from the 1967 Abortion Act, that abortion is only allowed when two doctors agree that the risks of abortion are less than continuing the pregnancy. Now, a few people have pointed out, including David Ferguson from New Zealand, which had the same law there, that there's no evidence of benefit for abortion. There's, there's no evidence that the risk of abortion is ever less than childbirth. But in Britain, the way it continues is because it's based on a good faith medical decision. I mean, good faith, at least in US law, good faith versus a reasonable medical decision. Good faith means that I don't intend anybody harm. This is my best guess medical decision. A reasonable medical decision means you have to be able to point to medical evidence. Here's the studies to justify why I came up with this opinion. So in the law, at least in our US, my model law that we try to do there, we require the physician's reasonable medical decision, not just a good faith medical decision, because good faith is just, well, I didn't intend her harm. So. Yeah.
Yeah, so with trying to reestablish the focus, what do you put on a billboard, I guess, is my question. What do you put on a billboard if we're trying to refocus this?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's go to theunchoice.org or unchoice.com. Do you know which one it is, Jackie? We have a bunch of ads that we already created that focus on unwanted abortions. One, for example, is a broken lamp just on the floor, and at the top it says, you know, Jenny's husband could be very persuasive. And then it starts going into, statistics about unwanted, forced, coerced abortions or whatever. So there are ways to focus on unwanted abortions and unsafe abortions. And of course, I'd also encourage you to tie it in with like referrals to post-abortion counseling groups. See, this could be kind of a two-way thing, that we know a lot of people are being hurt by unwanted abortions. Here's where you can find help, even 20 years later. Things like that. So it's, it should be very much overlap, because again, we have to demonstrate, Catholics, Christians, pro-lifers of all stripes, we have to demonstrate that we don't hate women. The other side tries to portray us as hateful, bigoted people, right? But we're actually more pro-woman than they are. And we need to demonstrate that. They're willing to participate in coerced abortions, do abortions on women who are being sex trafficked, right? So, there are ads, and we got a whole bunch of them. If you go to afterabortion.org, there's a link to it. But we changed the website name a couple times. I think it's theunchoice.org or .com, or maybe both. I forget. You do have a question?
Sure. Kind of a technical question, I guess. At the outset, you said this hadn't yet been peer-reviewed. So if we wanted to dig in or refer to the results of your study, are these publicly available? Could we point to those and reference that?
Well, we have two of the U.S. studies are already peer-reviewed. Okay, so if you search for my name, Reardon, if you go to cureus.com, C-U-R-E, us.com, and search for Reardon, you'll see 3 of our abortion studies published there. If you go to PubMed, search for Reardon, David C., you'll see a list of all our studies. Jackie's got a link to and I'm not sure how she'll share it, but we got a link to the Canadian study, the preprint that we can share, and you can refer to that. It's just not been peer reviewed yet. Like I said, I've submitted to a journal, and usually you get a couple reviewers, and the editor just, after one reviewer says, oh, this is nonsense because these people are anti-abortion, and he probably just pre-screened asking women who regret their abortions to answer the question. So like, read the methods. It was random. We clearly didn't even ask. So we get nonsensical rejections without fair consideration all the time. So I'm used to it, but it will eventually get published, and we just have to keep shopping around. Yeah. Yeah.
What can we do to make this better? How do we educate women, especially in schools, and being young women?
Well, I think one thing, again, everywhere it should be part of the conversation. And even in schools, for example, discuss the fact that most abortions are not freely wanted, and prepare young women and young men for the fact that you may face pressure to have an abortion, and nothing's good going to come from it. All the psychological ramifications come from the fact that you're doing something contrary to your own values and preferences, and hoping that, well, if I do it today, I can get over it tomorrow. I was just telling Michael, who drove me over here, that though I'm mad at the parents who pressure their daughters, their 14, 15-year-old, 16-year-old daughters into having an abortion, I also have empathy for them that they're being lied to, and they're buying into the lie that abortion is a magic wand that turns her life back, and her life will go on the way it was. But once she's pregnant, it can't ever go back. She's already a mother. The question is she a mother of a living child or a dead child? And they're not told, again, the abortion clinic, when they go there, I mean, there's countless stories of women who tell, when they ask about, is it a baby, all those things, all those are warning signs that I'm not going to feel well after this abortion. In fact, majority of the women who are asked at the abortion clinics, how do you expect you're going to feel after this? Most, not too good, okay? So only a few, like, I'm going to be fine, for most. And again, so the pre-warning that you're going to be pressured. The pre-warning to young men that if a girl comes to you and says, I'm pregnant, responding, what do you want to do? She's going to hear as, oh, you're not in it. She's already feeling abandoned. If you try to be a respectful young man, society tells him, oh, be supportive of whatever she wants to do. If he says that, she's like, well, I guess I'm in this. So the lack of enthusiasm, oh, we can make this work, is a message, well, maybe you should consider abortion, right? So there's so many layers of this, and again, as a society, we need to, again, just elevating the discussion that no abortion should occur unless it's freely wanted and consistent with the woman's own values and preferences. You know, that's just kind of common sense, even though pro-lifers can believe that, yeah, but even that abortion is wrong. Well, that's a separate issue. But if we can, again, refocus, and so one of the problems I've faced with pro-life groups, some pro-life groups don't want to shift the conversation from the baby because we want to win on the moral high ground. Life is sacred. Everybody should love, protect every life. And I don't have an argument with that argument, other than, every ideal that we strive for, we fall short of, I guess. And Jesus wasn't able to convert everybody based on proclamation of the truth. Sometimes the pragmatic argument is going to be more effective. And to me, this is the pragmatic argument, is 60% of women would rather be able to carry the baby to term if they had support from others, from society, and weren't feeling all this pressure to have an abortion. And can't we at least all agree that no woman should have an abortion unless she freely wants it and it's consistent with her values and preferences? And that, again, to me, that's a common ground argument, and it's hard for the other side to oppose. And sometimes it's hard to get pro-lifers to say, oh, but I want to talk about this. But I'm saying, yeah, but this will be more effective, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That just beating people's heads over the fact that abortion, in fact, as I said, when people harden their heart, and we've seen this, when you try to show pictures of aborted babies, for example, for the person who's hardened their heart to that, that's just offensive. That's, they used to call it pornography, so they consider it the most, so it's a brutal way to try to force people to confront a reality they already know, but they've already chosen to harden their heart to, right? I mean, as I said, everybody knows on some level abortion kills a baby. How much value you put on that, you can have some sway over. And people harden their hearts. And like I said, I'm totally convinced that if we can stop even 40% of coerced and unwanted abortions, public sentiment about abortion will rapidly decline. It's actually, even like the hard cases. I've got a whole book about rape and incest pregnancies where we have interviews with 127 or 197 I think, women who had rape or incest pregnancies. Even the hard cases, all these elements still apply. Most women facing the hard cases do not freely want their abortions, and they're not consistent with their values and preferences, and that's why most of them say it didn't help, it caused more trauma. But you can't have that public discussion because people get all wrapped, they won't look deeply into those issues, but eventually they will when they begin to look at, well, is there any evidence that abortion helps women from rape pregnancies to recover faster? Not a bit. But nobody asks that question. But if we made the abortion clinics liable for asking that question, it would start shedding light on even that issue. More questions?
We know that there's no indication, thank you. We know that there's no indication for illness, injury, or disease that abortion fixes. So why do the medical profession do it? Like if it is my body, my choice, and I went in and said, cut my arm off, I don't want it, they wouldn't do it. So why abortion? To me, that's where I put a lot of the blame on the medical profession, because they know that they have two patients in pregnancy, they've abandoned one, and the other two harm. I don't know, do you have any answer to that? Why?
Well, the why, even for the medical profession, of the push towards legalizing abortion way back in even the 30s and 40s was a direct result of the eugenics. and population control, and the whole idea that certain people we don't want born into the world. And so it's been an outgrowth that to a certain degree, that if some women are willing to want an abortion, we should do it just because that gets rid of an extra mouth. So, yeah, I totally agree with you that yes, and that's always been my whole take on this, is that doctors have no justification to do an abortion because there's no evidence of benefit and plenty of evidence of risk. Yet they hide behind, well, we're just helping women do what they want. And of course, one of the first cases in Britain, I'm going to blank on his name. Pardon? Yeah. It wasn't it? Yeah, it was Alex Bourne?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, Alex Bourne, but it was a rape, at least alleged rape case, where he did an abortion and it went to court whether or not that was, and they decided, well, because of the circumstances, it was not, he wasn't found guilty. But so the rape and incest issue has always been kind of, the wedge issue into it. Though even, as what I just said, there's no evidence of benefit. I mean, there's evidence of great public empathy for how horrible that situation is. And that's, what was used as, and to a certain degree, all these other cases, there's all kinds of public empathy. Actually, the first woman I interviewed and, started me down this, Nancy Jo Mann, founded Women Exploited by Abortion. And she began giving talks after many years of substance abuse and suicidal behavior and other things. She found some healing and she began giving talks about her abortion. She'd had 2 children already. Her husband, became pregnant. She was in her 16, 18 weeks pregnant, and her husband up and leaves her. And she's all panicky and scared, and her mother, pretty much the same day, says, well, you have to have an abortion. There's no way you're going to be able to take care of 2 children and the third one. And so she's in kind of a haze, does what her mother tells her. And I mean, she's a grown woman, but our decision-making processes are sometimes clamped down in crisis. And this is another actually interesting area of crisis theory, that people who are in a state of crisis are very suggestible and at risk of going along with what some authority figure, trusted figure says this is how to handle this problem. So the rape and incest victim, but in fact, some of the rape and incest victims, they reported in our survey, our interviews, that when they tried to tell their parents, it turns out I'm pregnant, and the assumption that you have to have an abortion, they'd like, well, I'm not sure I want to do the abortion. As soon as they hesitated about having an abortion, people looked at them like, well, maybe you weren't really raped then. See, the cycle turns around like, how could you want a rapist baby? Well, it's not about wanting a rapist baby. It's about, I've been a victim, and now you're asking me to victimize my own child. It's just that women instantly switch. So the fear of rape, I like to point this out, the fear of rape overlays the fear of a rape pregnancy. People think about, many of these women who may have thought, I'd have an abortion if I ever raped. But once the rape is in the past and now the pregnancy is in front, there's a little different dynamic and way of thinking about it. Now you're thinking about the baby and how can I live with the abortion and what, right? So the rape issue so distorts the conversation where people are saying, I wouldn't want to be raped. Yeah. Then it seems natural to say, so I wouldn't want to have a rapist baby. Yeah, nobody wants that, but they're separate issues really, right? So I guess I kind of wandered off, but. So that book's called Victims and Victors is the name of that book, Victims and Victors. And actually you can get, I think we have a electronic version available through Amazon if you just want a Kindle version. But yeah, there's no evidence of benefit, plenty of evidence of risk, yet getting the conversation going in public is very, very difficult because nobody wants to talk about it. Everybody's hardened in their positions. But again, that's where liability, we don't really have to get into that issue because let the liability issue solve it. Yeah.
I'd just like to make 2 comments regarding what you taught us here today. The first, what you explained, changes the information or disinformation that people have about necessary abortions in extreme cases, and that women want it, and it's a woman's right, sexual health right, the way the government advertises it. So this debunks it, so I think this is very effective strategy to start using, because they have the lie of they're for the woman and we're not. This flips it right back, like you said. I'm just repeating what you said, but this is the main point. The other point, for some people, the elephant in the room, the lady asked, the globalists who are running this planet, they're anti-human, and depopulation is their agenda, disguised in all the lies that they prof on us. And unfortunately, the world's governments, especially here, the Canadian government, is all on board. We're exporting abortion and contraception and everything, our government. So when the medical profession goes along with abortion with no justifiable medical reasons, it's because they're pressured through their government authorities to do so. And not too many people have a spine to resist that if that's their career. So we're spiraling into hell by being silent and everybody going along, but God sees everything. So what's happening here is demonic and against God. So we have to stand up to it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it is an anti-life culture that hides behind pro-woman. They're hiding behind women's right to choose. And actually, if you look in the Lawrence Lader, who founded the National Abortion Rights Action League in New York in 1965 or whether, with Bernard Nathanson, who did the silent scream, who became pro-life afterwards. But anyway, Lader was deeply involved with the population control movement and wrote a book called Zero Population and all this other stuff. He was actually also deeply involved with Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood, and all that stuff. But anyway, he bragged about how he went to Betty Friedan, who wrote The Feminist Mystique, and kind of launched the National Organization of Women and all the feminist movement in the 60s. Her book didn't talk about reproductive rights or abortion at all. It was about all economics and how women weren't being fairly treated in the economic sphere or whatever. But he convinced her to lead the National Organization of Women, and I'm personally convinced, I haven't found the evidence, but that he probably opened the gates to a lot of the foundations which were pouring money into population control to make abortion about women's right to choose according to their own body. So it was a population controller who convinced a feminist to make this a core issue of feminism. It never came from the feminists. It was, I guess the closest would be Margaret Sanger, who was, of a woman and feminist, but obviously deeply tied up with eugenics and population control from the very first. I mean, she also was targeting, population control for blacks and others. I mean, it was very targeted. I mean, she said more from the fit, less from the unfit. So I think even Planned Parenthood has now distanced itself, kind of admitted that Margaret Sanger was a racist. That doesn't mean they've really distanced themselves from the fact that they're still involved in the same policies. But yeah, we do need to get that wedge between the anti-life population controllers and the pro-woman message, because they hide behind being pro-woman. We need to expose the fact that a lot of abortions are against women and violate their own values and preferences, and we're going to be more pro-women than they are. Okay.
One more and that's it then, because I think we need to get to the rest.
All right. Last question, you can make it a good one.
Yeah, because I'm just wondering, because of I'm thinking of a similar issue up here. I'm just wondering, if you ever run any studies or stats regarding abortion for sexual preference? So I know up here in Canada, there was a law that was trying to be passed by MP Kathy Wagenthal against sex-selective abortion. And I know that has caused it's a similar sort of common ground issue where people on the pro-choice side of things, not necessarily pro-abort, but cared about women, and then saw this bill coming out, wait, babies are being killed through abortion just because they're female? They turn out to be women? So I'm just wondering, did you do any like stats or run any, ask a question like that, any data on maybe that was one of the reasons why the abortion occurred?
Yeah, we did not include that, and not in this study, and it's kind of detailed. So part of the problem is with this study, we had to do a study that women could complete in about 5 minutes, because it's a low-cost survey. So we didn't get into any of those details, and I'm not familiar with any other research that has looked at what percentage of abortions are sex selection.